Go Loud presents the Talking Bollox podcast.
What you waiting for? Put your back in it. Just a little more. Throw your weight in it now. Tell your body you're dead. Walk it hard and long. When you finish that,
The hip knocker.
go down, go down, go down. Come up, come up, come up.
Here we go, episode 44, Talking Bollox. It's me, COB.
It's me, Terry Flower.
And today we're joined by...
Am I supposed to say who I am?
Well, it would help us.
I had no idea that this was expected. Roddy Doyle.
Roddy Doyle, here brought to you today by Go Loud. Go Loud is the home of Irish podcasts. So we'll kick this off. We were just talking about how you spell bollocks.
Well, I think you've made two major mistakes there, lads. Talking, for a start, Talkin apostrophe.
Yeah, drop the
Yeah.
G.
Right.
And bollocks, I think the way it's presented there, I would go, Bollocks.
Right.
Although, I've no objection to the way it is there, but, it depends on, if you were saying that's a load of bollocks, it's IX. But actually, IX wouldn't look good on that screen.
Yeah, you're right there.
Yeah.
We should have just given him a
So
bell.
I think you're grand, but I do find the talking thing a bit formal. You should get rid of the G and get in an apostrophe.
Can we change that on?
Well, do you know what?
Not necessarily immediately. I'm quite happy to continue.
Yeah. Well,
On the promise that you'll do it during the week.
We'll get that short.
I'll tell you what you could do. Write it out 100 times.
yeah, there you go. Attention. If there was anyone to ever come in and critique it, Roddy, I'm glad it was you. And not
Well, I wasn't expecting it. And it's grand. It's brought out the temptation to get out a red biro and go over and correct it is nearly overwhelming. So happy to be a podcast. Seems fine to me.
Right, yeah, that's grand.
Yeah.
And then Tardens and Calvin at the end. How's that?
Yeah, grand. And I like, even though it's not grammatically, I suppose, I like that little and thing. I'm not sure what you call that.
Ampersand.
Is that an ampersand?
Yeah, there you go. Every day's a skill day now.
The Calvin fella.
I think they look great sometimes, and I think they look good there between the two of you. And I think you're wise as well. Sometimes it's the rhythm. Terence and Calvin has a little bit more going for it than Calvin and Terence somehow. It's more musical.
Yeah.
So fair play to you. Yeah, well
And
done.
what about the Dublin skyline? I think that really fits well.
Yeah, no problem there. Yeah, and I like the mix of the old and the modernity, yeah.
Yeah.
I think poor old Jim Larkin there with the spike sticking out at the back of it, it's like a big tail or something, so I think...
Do you know what that is, Roddy? That's we're just trying to epitomise what happened. So Jim Larkin's there all fighting for workers' rights on the end of O'Connell Street, but then you look around them and it's just capitalism. There's McDonald's, Burger King, Starbucks everywhere. So that's basically a fuck you to Jim Larkin.
Ah, the big finger.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
It's a disaster, O'Connell Street,
Isn't it?
It's horrible.
Isn't it? And then
Should be a big European boulevard you get in Paris or Berlin, and it's just... It's awful. It's really awful.
right. So
Okay, are we done?
we spent the first 20 minutes just critiquing
Yeah.
the Talking Bollocks logo
No, I wasn't
and
expecting this at
O'Connell
all.
Street.
I wasn't expecting
And
this
while
at all.
Calvin was away, make sure I got a tattoo on the back of my leg.
Yeah, Terence
Which-
got yeah.
The whole logo. Come here and I'll give you a gander. Look.
The whole thing.
Yeah, on the back of my leg there. What do you think
All right. That's
Put it up on the chair there, Terence, so the camera can see. Yeah,
did that hurt?
Yeah, a stone. Yeah, it was a killer, yeah.
Yeah.
you can
And how much
barely see it there, yeah.
Yeah, that's very good.
How much did it
that
cost
set
him?
you back then?
No comment. A few quid, yeah. No, but that got stuck on the back of my leg. Calvin left me alone for too long. We say Calvin's like me SNA.
Yeah.
You can't really be
On his
trusted on
mind,
my own.
Why the back of your leg?
Didn't really think it through. I only got told the night before. He was like, come over and I'll do a tattoo for you. So I went over the next day with no intentions, no plans, and I just said, fuck her
And
on
did
the
you
back of my leg.
hesitate before you said yeah?
No. That's the issue
That's
with
his
me,
problem, Roddy. He doesn't really think things through. He's spontaneous.
And I wonder what sort of state it'll be in about 20 years.
Well, hopefully the podcast keeps going because
Yeah.
I have a funny story. So I went on this thing. It's called a mystery tour in college. So basically, what happened was you paid them X amount. Say it was, I don't know, the fee was 150 quid, and you sent them your passport. And the lads went and booked a trip abroad for 50 people out of college. So 50 of us rock up to the airport, not knowing where we're going, and then they hand you the boarding pass. So turns out we went to Brussels in Belgium. So we went over there for 3 days. Mad trip. Like really, really mad trip. I'll save the stories for another podcast. But on the last day, just before we had to head for the airport, one of the lads went in and he got the college logo tattooed on his arse. So we nearly missed the bus to the airport because he was getting that on his arse. And then 2 weeks later, he dropped out. So I just hope now we can keep this podcast going, and that's not a bad omen that he's at the getting on his legs.
What college was it?
Well, the National College of Ireland, NCI. So
Did you get the whole thing? National College of Ireland.
the NCI logo?
Big lad.
Yeah. Well, it's big arse. Yeah.
Like Nicki Minaj, that fella.
Yeah. So we end up dropping out, and I was just like, "Would you not just like try and just finish out the year?" And he's like, "No, that's it." Yeah, so there we go.
Yeah, and just a quick shout out to Ken Lackin for showing that tattoo from me.
Yeah, so
legend.
if you want, we can get you a talking Bollox tattoo if you want.
No, I'm grand, thanks.
No, all right, sound.
Yeah.
Right,
Moving on.
Thanks for the
Have you got any tattoos?
I don't.
Yeah, I had a feeling. She looked at me a bit funny when I showed you mine.
No, I mean, I know they are, the thing, nobody's complete without at least 7 of them. No.
Yeah, I heard that, what would you say, not contagious, but when you get one, you want more.
Yeah,
What would you
no,
call it? Addictive.
I'm getting a little bit of the itch.
Yeah.
It's and the sports people who have more time on their hands than most of us who can't go through an afternoon without adding to what they
And
already
more
have.
money than most of us as well. That's
Yeah.
the thing, they're covered in tattoos. But anyways, we're going to have to move on
Right.
to our zingers from the last 3 weeks. Have you listened to an episode? Do you know what a zinger is?
Yeah, you asked me a question, is it?
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
it's an either or.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So we've about...
Because
what's
I
that
was,
coming at me there?
yeah.
Can you... No, we can't even zoom in. Can we? There we are.
That is like
12,000 of them.
it's like a 12-fold accumulator.
It's like the Auntie Betty shopping receipt how it done. Right.
Because I was away, Roddy, we've accumulated loads of them, so we have to go through them all now.
And you're asking me them all?
We're going to have to. It's just a quick fire.
All right.
Quick fire, yeah?
Okay.
Barbecue or buffalo wings?
You're going to have to say that again.
Barbecue or buffalo wings.
I couldn't give a shite.
You had to
Barbecue then.
But that's
I've nothing to
childish,
say.
Roddy.
I've nothing to say.
No comment. It's not an interrogation. You're not sitting in the bridewell now, Roddy.
I know, yeah. No, nothing really to say. Buffalo wings. No,
No, haven't I?
I don't have much of an opinion on that at all.
All right.
Right, moving on.
I'd happily eat either, but
Yeah, you're not
Take
fussy.
what you're
I
given.
wouldn't. I'll let somebody else make my mind
Yeah.
up.
Yeah, you're
What's the
dead right.
percentages on it?
69% jet buffalo, 31% jet barbecue. Do you call it a belch or a burp?
Belch.
Yeah.
Belch, yeah. Belch, 57%, burp, 43%. This is the most childish one we've had in the last 3 weeks. John McGuckin, you
So-
want to grow up?
We had Joe on. Joe does a podcast here as well called Stall. So we had him on as a guest, and we asked him had he got any singers for us, and he says
Nappy or diaper.
nappy or diaper, as if people in Ireland call it a diaper.
Oh, it's an appy.
Yeah, but like I don't know anybody on this island
No,
that calls it a diaper.
No.
I don't know where he came out with it.
This is going to prove it. 99% said
99
It's
people.
a better word.
Yeah,
That's
nappy.
kind of. It's a warm, funny,
Yeah.
Yeah.
affectionate word. The Van, my book and film.
Where they deep fry an appy.
Yeah, you don't deep diaper. It's not as funny. And when your man comes up to the when he finds that his cod is actually a nappy, and he says it's a nappy,
Yeah.
I think it would still be funny if he said it's a diaper, but it's not remotely as funny.
No,
It's a bit
nappy
dampened,
It
wins
has to
that.
be a nappy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, do you know what, Joe, we love you and all, but that was shy.
Moving on, 99% to 1%, yeah? Now, what was that question? I think you put the question, Brian. He said, would you prefer Nutella or chocolate spread? And you said, do you call it Nutella or chocolate spread?
No, he said that he call it. Nutella
Are you
or
sure?
Yeah.
I could be wrong. Do you call it Nutella or chocolate spread?
It depends if it is Nutella or.
Do you know the
something else.
difference
What, they
between
got
the
the
two?
same
I
thing?
don't know. I wouldn't be indulgent in either of them, to be honest with you.
The healthy
When
fella?
there would have been a time when there'd be is it a jar of it, is it? In
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
house?
yeah.
And as far as I remember, it was always Nutella.
Yeah, but some people were texting us saying that chocolate spread is just like normal melted chocolate, and then Nutella is
Hazelnut.
hazelnut. I thought they were all hazelnut. I didn't
I
know
don't know
this.
why you're looking at me. It's another go back to buffalo wings. I
Yeah,
couldn't give
well,
a shite, really.
Someone texted us and said their child calls it black jam, and I think that's a
that's
great
brilliant.
name. That is
No,
a
no.
great name.
That's a
yeah,
cracker,
that's
Yeah,
great.
can I get a black jam sandwich,
Black
please?
jam,
Yeah,
brilliant. That's lovely.
you can take that one home now.
Can I
with
have
you.
it?
Yeah.
yeah, brilliant.
Open the press. There's no black jam.
67% said Nutella, 33% said chocolate spread. When you give it someone your mate a lift over the wall, what you call that? What you call it back in your day?
So long since I did that.
You're only a pup.
Christ, I can't remember.
Uh,
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
so the options
who-
were a boost or a bunty. Do you ever call either of them?
I don't think either, but probably Boost would have been.
Yeah, boost for me as well.
God, I wish I could remember now. That
Oh,
really.
was it? No, I said bunty. A boost is when you lift them up behind.
Yeah.
No, those, you see, I haven't, you know,
You haven't been
those
acting the
days are
Bollox in a
long,
while,
long
yeah.
over. So, not even a distant memory, to be honest with you.
Another lifetime. Yeah.
79% said a boost, 21% said a bunty. Fuck me, we're only halfway through, right? How do I word this one? Leap or scale? When
Yeah.
you're running to jump over a wall, do you say you leapt it or you scaled it?
A wall.
Yeah.
Leapt it.
Yeah.
No, would I say that?
I left
Leapt the wall or scaled the wall?
Scaled sounds more formal, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
more accurate. But
We're not formal people, though.
again, I'm trying to remember the last time I. Oh, actually, now that I think of it, last Thursday I climbed the wall. It wasn't much of a wall, but I think I just climbed the wall, and I was actually quite relieved I managed to get over it.
Why were you climbing the wall last Thursday?
Shortcut.
Just happened to take the
It
shock
was
away
a
from the
casual
police.
thing. I wasn't trying to get away from anybody. But
I
it
was
just
thinking,
made
was
way
there a
more
guard
sense.
car behind you? Oh,
It just
fuck's
went.
sake.
It made way more sense than going around the long way. It was actually Friday night. Yeah,
And you were scaling the wall?
it was by my standards. Yeah, at my age. Yeah, I was
Right, what happened
quite
that?
relieved I got over it. Yeah, but if you looked at it, you'd be howling with laughter.
It was a pat. But leapt the wall is 20%, scale is 80%. This is the one. Subtitles or dub do you prefer? So when we were outside,
Subtitles every time.
Yeah.
yeah, when we were outside, so I watched Squid Games recently and I watched it dubbed. And Roddy and Calvin more than happy with me about it.
No.
Now, I'd usually say subtitles, but I just put it on and it was just in dubbed and it was a
This
bit
is
of
what I was
crack.
saying. I think it defaults to dub.
You said it was American accents. That must get in the way, really, when you see all these Korean characters with American accents.
Oh.
It should. Though.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
Tom,
maybe
yeah.
you should watch an American film when all the characters have South
Korean
Korean
accents.
accents. In fairness, if it's an option, if it's possible, if you scroll through all the options.
I think they did it well. For some here, it was like nearly matched what they were saying and all.
It takes the
I
purpose
met
away.
a German actor who was known as The Voice, and he was the dubbed voice for nearly every Hollywood male lead you could think of. And he told me that at one point his agent asked for too much money for, I think it was a Clint Eastwood role, and they turned it down and gave the job to another actor, and the German audiences just wouldn't accept it. They weren't having it.
They're too
Really?
efficient.
Yeah.
That's what it is with Germans.
No, it was just that they were used to the sound of his voice representing Clint Eastwood, and I think everybody else at that time. So that was his living. Yeah, he did the voices.
That's mad because a
Dublin.
couple of
We
weeks
had
ago
this
we were
conversation.
talking about
We
it.
had this
Who
conversation,
does
like-
Morgan Freeman in Germany?
Yeah.
And does it make sense?
Because Morgan Freeman has such a distinctive voice.
Yes.
Does someone really distinctive have to do his voice for every film?
Well, that's what I'm saying, that the German audiences were insisting that they get. I can't remember his name now, but this lad had to be, well, as I say, Clint is. He may well be Morgan Freeman as well. I
Yeah.
don't know.
German fella's name's probably Hans Vocal or something like that.
Sounds fairly German.
Doesn't
although
it?
yeah, no, it was about 20 years ago when I met him. So I can't remember his name, unfortunately. Really nice fella, though.
But
Really
this
nice
led us on to another story that we went and talked about outside because we were saying, did they have to dub your films in America then because how hard they'd find it to understand? And you said there was a rumour going around.
When the commitments came out, yeah, part of the myth was that people going into the commitments in America were given a little booklet, a glossary with all the slang in it so they could look it up. And that story makes no sense whatsoever because if you get your little glossary, you go into the cinema, sit down, the lights go down, you wouldn't be able to read.
Yeah.
So it makes no sense. So it's just, people have said it to me over the years, and so there was no dubbing or subtitling at all. But yeah, it makes no. You'd need a miner's helmet or a torch to read the glossary.
Yeah, a headlamp.
Yeah.
But
You can see why people would struggle though
Yeah.
with our slang, you know. It's people on the south side that you can't understand me, bloody. You're one of me own. Do you know? We're all struggling here. But dubbed 32%, subtitled 68%.
People who watch a dub just can't read. I think we've established that.
Yeah.
And that's great, you know. I think I remember somebody talking to me about audiobooks, and I was on the verge of saying, no, audiobooks are, and she said, because I can't read, and it's brilliant to be able to listen to the books. So that shut me up,
Yeah.
quite rightly. So yeah, I can see why a lot of people would go for the dubbed option. But if it's just idleness, if it's laziness,
It was laziness from me.
And your part,
100%,
yeah, so-
definitely his fella.
yeah, get into the corner there and stay.
But next one. Do you call her a quilt or a duvet?
Duvet.
Yeah, of
Yes.
course. Duvet 91%, the quilt 9%. Can't believe you had to do that. Why you had to do with so many singers, Roddy? You were struggling. Yeah, look.
Sorry about this.
Bear with us,
Sorry,
bear
you
with
know.
us. We're at the
Are
end.
there
of
many
it.
left?
2 more left here. Would you rather go 100 years in the future or 100 years in the past?
Now, see, this is a good one because it's filter thought. You know what I mean?
100 years, what would that be?
1921. You're talking.
1921.
in
Where? Do I have to be here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
War of Independence.
Yeah, that's what I was
Brilliant.
ta-
Yeah,
yeah.
I'll go 100 years in the past. War
Do you
of
know, you're not
Independence.
thinking about, like, what could that be in the future?
Couldn't give a shite what the future is. No interest in it.
Well, there you go.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as long as I can put on the gas fire in the morning. I don't care what the future's like, really.
Well, the way
No
things are
interest.
going, there probably won't be gas in 100 years. So
Yeah, I know that.
You
so
never know.
And I'm not, no, I think maybe if you got me when I was younger, I would have said, oh, the future.
Yeah.
But I suppose because I don't have all that much of a future left myself,
You
I
never
think
know.
I'd rather go backwards.
Touch
So
wood.
yeah, I think given it's the War of Independence, being in Dublin during the War of Independence and the run up to the treaty, and I think it could have been really interesting. Yeah, and you'd hear, because there wouldn't have been much traffic, you'd hear all the gunshots. when
Yeah.
there would be something
Flying
like-
columns going around.
Yeah.
People on push bikes doing hits.
and pretty scary when you're coming up to curfew and you're not home yet.
yeah.
And the black and tans are going to come around the corner.
Yeah.
I'm changing my mind. Can we go?
Yeah, 100 years in the future, yeah.
I was thinking, we had this doesn't
Yeah,
sound
yeah.
all that great, Roddy.
It'd be great. You go 100 years into the future, and the first thing you see is the black and tans.
They're back. They'll call them the back and hands.
Right, 57% of people would rather go into the future, 43% for the past.
Be interested to get a breakdown of age.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
would be.
Go back. That I suggest you get a breakdown of the age group. Who do younger people want
Tend
to
to
go
lean
into
in
the
the
future?
future,
Do
yeah.
the older ones
I
want to
think
go
we'd have
backwards?
more of a younger crowd on Instagram. Anyways,
Yeah.
but I'd like to actually, we have to, you can get the numbers. Alan, if you can pull the numbers up during the episode, do that for us of what age groups are listening and what percentage and stuff like
We
that.
actually have a
will ya?
wide audience because I had the numbers before and there was people in the 65 plus age bracket.
Sure, I know that from walking down the road, people putting you
Yeah.
like, that's
Alright.
mad.
Yes, we have a wide range of listeners. And then this is the last one, Roddy. Sorry
This is
about
the
this.
most important one.
Right up.
Yeah, I already know his answer to this one.
No, this isn't the most important one, actually. I'm going to ask you the most important one. It's not in the sheet, yeah? Right, you ready for this, Roddy? He's laughing with his nerves.
I'm slightly terrified.
Yeah, you should be. Do you piss in the shower, Roddy?
No,
I think you're a lawyer.
I don't
Childish.
care what you think. I don't. I tell you, I own the shower.
Do you really not?
No.
What happens when the water hits you and you need to have a slash?
Well, it hasn't arisen really, lads. You know, no.
Doesn't happen to you.
There's a. I don't know if I'm giving too much away about my personal life. There's a toilet in the house and there's a shower. So
I know,
there are
but
two
sometimes you don't need to go and then you get in the shower and you're like, I need to go, but I don't want to get out.
How long would you be in the shower for?
About 10 minutes. No.
Why would I? You know, I'm not washing my hair or anything. Again, that's a distant
you're
memory.
saving
I have
more
no idea
time.
what that involves.
Neither is Alan
So
Brennan.
no, the honest answer, and it is the honest answer. I'm not being evasive, or I'm not
Yeah.
avoiding. I wasn't anticipating the question, but no, no.
The first time you were ever asked that one?
I think so. Yeah.
No, better place than
Again,
talking
I
bollocks.
couldn't. You know, if somebody came up and said, "I asked you that question in 1963," mind you, nobody had a shower in 1963, so
A
it was
little
all
budgie bat.
bath once a week.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the real most important one at the end of this, should we keep doing zingers, Roddy? Yeah or no?
If you had me on every week, no, but
You're
I'm
sick
not
of
on
them?
every week, so yeah.
Bear
Yeah.
in mind, we only did 1 or 2 a week. That's just an accumulation of the last 3
Why did you
episodes.
inflict them all on me?
Because you
Oh,
just,
it's because they come in from the audience, do they?
Yeah.
Right. Ah, yeah, gotcha now.
yeah, so,
Yeah, so we have to
so
wait
next
for the
week,
results.
next week
Yeah.
we'll probably only have 1 or 2.
Right.
But
Roddy
Because you
sitting
probably
there
have
going,
some slack-jawed gobshite who'd only be capable of answering 1 or 2. Anyway.
well, look at I know next week's guest is, so you want to be careful what you're saying. I'll tell you after this.
But 95% said we should keep doing them. 5% said we
I
shouldn't.
don't want to get in the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, I have
Yeah.
a good one for this week's one.
Right, so
though.
now I'm moving into this week's singles and I'm going to try and hit that camera again.
But so I'm only back off my holidays, right? I was in Mexico for 2 weeks, and before I went, I had this naivety about me that anywhere you travel, someone speaks English, so there's not really that much pressure on you to learn a second language. But then I went to Mexico, and nobody speaks English in Mexico. They all speak Spanish, and like they're determined to get the point across to you. And I remember years ago, you'd meet a foreign person on the street, and you'd be explaining routes to them, like, or directions even, and you're like, you go down here and go left, and they'd be like nodding their head but still puzzled. That's how I was in Mexico. People speak to me in Spanish. I was like, I don't speak Spanish, and they're still like trying to get the message across. So I was saying to myself, kicking myself for not learning another language growing up. You know, like I done French in school. I know a bit of broken.
The Je m'appelle fella?
Yeah, basically, yeah. So and then where European language, they're all derived from Latin anyway. So the grammar and the vocabulary is a bit similar. So I was able to pick up certain things what they were saying in Spanish, but barely. So my zinger for this week is, would you rather be able to speak every language on earth or speak to animals?
Now that's a zinger.
I already speak to animals. They rarely answer back. But,
Roddy Doyle.
An African grey.
I don't know. I don't think I'd like to speak to animals. I prefer to use my imagination.
Yeah.
So, speaking every language in the world.
As in, you go to Brazil, you can speak fluent Portuguese. You go to the middle of the Amazon, whatever language you're speaking.
I was reading a book. I can't remember who was it by, but in the introduction she said she was fluent in 8 languages.
Yeah.
That would do me. That would be brilliant, wouldn't it? To be able to swerve from one language to the other.
Yeah, but the thing about it is, no matter who you meet, whatever language you're speaking, you can automatically communicate with them.
Yeah, but I reckon if you had 8 languages, you'd probably have a good stab at the others, because we borrow from languages.
Yeah, no,
and,
definitely,
and you know, when you're listening, if you're watching something from Denmark or Germany or whatever, you can hear like about half the words seem vaguely familiar.
But I think
Because
Dutch
they
and
come from
German,
the same place,
Dutch and German are the same. I don't know. I can't differentiate
So I reckon
between
if
them.
you had German, you'd probably have a good stab at the languages around Germany. And if you had French, you can have a good stab at. And if you had Spanish, Portuguese.
So you're going with the language over speaking to animals?
Yeah, because in my head I already speak to the animals in a way. You know, when the children's books I've written have talking dogs and seagulls and that sort of thing. And I suspect the opportunity to talk to a seagull. I'm changing my mind now.
I don't know.
Because I think seagulls are great, and I'd love to have a chat with.
I think they're cunts.
Why?
They're just noisy bastards, and there's gangs of them, and they're getting very rough.
Did you ever see the humans out there?
Oh, yeah, I know, but
The seagulls are worse. They're walking around with Stanley blades and all now.
Seagulls are out there snatching phones and all.
That's because.
Do you ever have a bag of chips and hout?
200 years ago, we wouldn't have seen a seagull because they'd have been out in the sea. And now we took away their fish. Then they had the dumps, right? So when I was a kid, you know the Alfie Byrne Road down there at Fairview, and the Causeway Road across to Dollymount?
Yeah.
They were built on top of ballast, rubbish.
Yeah.
And so the city, all the city's rubbish was dumped there for a long, long time. And there were thousands of seagulls in the air, thousands of them in the air. It was an amazing sight. And that doesn't happen anymore because we got the wheelie bins with the lids on them, you know. So they've got less and less to eat. They've changed the way they migrate. They are now urban birds. They nest on the roofs of houses to survive.
Yeah, I know, because seagulls aren't me. They're getting the HAP payment and all 3-bedroom gas and everything. Bloody.
Yeah, so I'm actually a big defender of the seagulls. And I think a lot of the hostility towards seagulls is actually, you know, I was out in Howth trying to take a photograph. There were 4 seagulls in a row on a wall. And I was trying to get a photograph of them. And this woman, I swear to God, she was on a bench sitting there and she said, "You're only encouraging them." And in my mind, she's not talking about seagulls. That's almost racist, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or she could be talking about kids. And then you hear the stuff. I heard a counsellor from Galway saying they're robbing handbags and phones.
They are.
And but if you hadn't been listening to the very beginning, if you hadn't known he was talking about seagulls, he could have been talking about immigrants.
Yeah.
Right? He could have been talking about humans. And I think a lot of the hostility directed towards seagulls is actually thinly veiled hostility towards different types of people. But I read a book about seagulls, and there was a brilliant study done when they were able to, seagulls, there were dumps in Essex for London's rubbish. Late afternoon, all the rubbish lorries would come from London, and the seagulls would convene, thousands and thousands of them over the air, and they'd descend on the rubbish then. And they never turned up on Sundays.
Are you joking me?
No. It wasn't that they'd come and they'd see there was nothing doing. They never bothered. They knew it was Sunday.
Fuck.
So,
My mind is blown.
yeah,
I'm
bank
baffled.
holidays confused them altogether because they'd turn up on the Monday, but it was a bank holiday. There'd be no rubbish. And they were confused and kind of angry in the air. But they didn't even bother turning up. So there's something going on there. And they live for 30 years and more. You can't be killing.
I seen that.
You can't
before.
be culling animals that live for 30 years.
So they remember the 90s
And
and all.
no, the good Christian seagulls, they don't work on Sundays.
Yeah.
And presumably the Muslim seagulls don't work on Fridays.
There you go.
I'm baffled with the fascination with seagulls.
It was a
comes from.
brilliant book. Brilliant book. But I love the seagulls, and I love just looking at them, you know, when I'm in town and I go up to Capel Street Bridge or something, because there's always a good gang of seagulls there, and there's something about them. It's easy to imagine them having conversations.
Yeah, the
And
noise
they've
of
kind
them.
of taken over Stephen's Green as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I peed the ducks in Stephen's Green. They don't get a look in.
Yeah, well,
So, anyways, you change your answer now. So you're saying you'd rather speak to the animals.
Because of seagulls.
I would like to speak German to the seagulls.
There's a good shout. Right. Now,
Yeah, that was a good tangent. I enjoyed that. That was a bit of
exhausted
crack.
after
That was a bit of crack. I'd rather talk to animals because I don't need to speak another language. I'm never leaving Dublin 7 or
okay.
Dublin 1.
You're on the south side now. You're in Dublin 2 at the moment.
Right, I'm never leaving Dublin.
All right.
So I'm fresh.
Right.
Have you literally never been out of Dublin?
I have been out a few times, a couple of bad experiences and here and there, and I just love Ireland. I just don't want to leave
Yeah.
Ireland. I got a little bit of stick on this podcast a few weeks ago because I said, would you prefer to never go away again on a holiday, or would you prefer to never use social media again? You have to pick one.
Yeah.
And I picked never going on a holiday again because I'm just not that fascinated with going anywhere. The only reason why I would go away would be to go over to a Liverpool match, which I am going to be doing soon. I think
Did you?
don't know
Have you
Steelers
never
do.
been to a Liverpool
Never
match?
been to a match. I just
Typical
haven't.
plastic
It's a-
supporter.
And would you go to a match here?
No, yeah, look, I would go to match here. I don't watch the League of Ireland. I'm not a fan of the League of Ireland.
Right.
I'd love to be. I'm
Yeah.
not. It's too late to jump on
The
board.
difference between going to a match and watching it on the telly is so...
Yeah.
It's just amazing. Yeah. So good.
Yeah,
It's well worth, what would you say, reining in your anxiety and going to
Yeah, so I'm
Anfield. It'd be
going to do
brilliant.
that for the match. And because England's very like Ireland, isn't it? But they see like
Liverpool is...
Yeah.
Yeah. You wouldn't be too far from home if you're in Liverpool.
You're a big Chelsea fan.
I am.
Sorry to hear.
And I'm a Bowes fan as well. Look at,
Oh, are you? Are you a big Bowes fan? Yeah.
Even more sorry to hear.
Love that. The Georgie Kelly fella. Shout out to Joe
Yeah.
Brennan for you.
I had a head of hair until they signed him last year, and I shaved it off. And I'm working on my Donegal accent.
But yeah, I'm choosing speaking to animals, yeah.
I think I'd pick the languages. Fuck animals.
Yeah, bro.
Do you ever when I tell a dog to get into bed, it gets into bed. It knows what I'm saying anyway, so. Do you ever tell
Probably
a dog?
you get lip off the dog if
Yeah.
it knew that you understood. Yeah.
But what if the dog could speak back to you? Shut your mouth. The paper the crack, wasn't
Get
it?
into bed. What are you shouting for?
Do you know what I mean?
So I wouldn't be into that. No, I'd rather I'd pick the language over the animals.
The dog would be phoning dog line as well.
Yeah, you know. We'd have a dog sitting here.
Pup
like-
line. Pup line.
So what's it like living with Calvin? Woof.
So, that's your zinger.
Yeah.
Right, I have a zinger.
Go on.
Right? Would you rather morning sex or sex in the
Wrap
in
this
the night?
podcast up.
That's boys.
Moving on.
Yeah.
Good zinger, no?
No, that's a bad one.
Moving
Not
on.
like that, boys. We're not having that one.
I can't believe I had to spend the last hour doing singers with Roddy Doyle.
I brought down the tone. We were talking about seagulls and animals and talking.
And then I just have to switch them out up
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
I prefer sex
That's
in
just
the
to
night
compensate
time,
to
anyways.
the fact that you've never been to a Liverpool match.
Yeah.
Yeah, it
You're
is.
trying
Yeah,
to be
just
caring.
throw that one
Oh,
in
yeah.
there, take the distraction
yeah.
away. Are we not going with that one now?
No.
Right, Roddy's not answering that. What are you going
I
with?
would just say the night. In
The night time,
yeah.
mate, same as well. Morning sex, start, morning breath and all. But yeah, moving on, Roddy, no
Sorry,
answer, no.
No.
Sound Roddy, plead the fifth. Yeah, no comment. Right.
Right, Calvin.
So something I want to talk about, right? It's been, I don't know, it's like a weekly occurrence at this stage. The planning permission that's been approved for the Cobblestone pub in Smithfield, Merchants Arch on the Keys, and even the goes far back as Moorstry as well, where the 1916 leaders hid. They want to extend the Olac through that, demolish that building, put in a hotel on top of the Marble Arch, or the Merchants Arch, and put a hotel on top of the Cobblestone pub as well.
Yeah.
So this seems to be constantly every week. There's a new hotel, there's a new office block coming in. This is a topic we've touched on many a times before,
Mm-hmm.
Terence, where they're just taking the soul and the identity out of Dublin. What makes Dublin Dublin? You know what I mean? They're saying it's the prop up the tourist industry, but it's not really, because what are tourists going to come here to see? There's going to be nothing. They're pushing, the regular people are getting pushed out. There's a hotel going on every street corner. There's an office block going beside that then. So before we know it, Dublin's just going to be one big office block surrounded by hotels. And where we all going to be? The likes of Kildare, Meath, Wicklow, Louth.
Yeah.
And before you know it, they're going to come in. They're going to say, do you know what you need here? More hotels, more office blocks. So it's stripping the soul away from the city. If anyone is listening from outside of Ireland and they say to me then, where do you recommend to come? I'm not going to say Dublin, because there's going to be nothing here for you to see. I'd recommend go and see Patrick Street in Cork. Go and see the Spanish Arch in Galway.
Yeah.
Go and see the Titanic experience in Belfast, because not Dublin. And this is our capital. This is our home, you know. And especially with you on, Roddy, you know what I mean? You're the epitome. You've put working class Dublin people on the map through literature and through film. And then people are coming to see that, you know what I mean? As you said, The Commitments was a big hit in the US. Imagine someone in the US seeing that now and they come over. Oh, where was that filmed? Oh, well, that's a hotel now, sorry. Oh, yeah, and do you know where that? Oh, yeah, that's an office block now.
Yeah.
So I just feel like, I don't know, every week we talk about this, and it shouldn't be two young bloods in a tracksuit talking about this. It should be a fella in a suit going on the telly and addressing this, saying, no, we're actually going to draw a line here, and we're going to not approve planning permission for that. We're going to take that back and see that that should be a protected landmark. Merchants Arch, when you think of Temple Bar, you think of walking through there.
Yeah.
When I walk through there with my daughter, I always have a joke and tell her leprechauns live here. And you need to watch, don't walk at the sides, because you might step on a leprechaun. And she'd just be terrified walking through. And like, it's a bit of a, she knows it's a laughing joke, but she'll walk dead centre through it. She won't walk at the sides, because I always tell her you could step on a leprechaun.
Yeah.
You know, like that. And my earliest memories of that is walking over the Halfpenny Bridge with my dad, then walking through there to go to the Temple Bar. So imagine what, you're going to walk over the Halfpenny Bridge, then it's going to be a hotel in front of you.
Well, Temple Bar itself, when I was your age, was going to be a bus depot. They were going to knock it all down and make a bus depot out of it, and that didn't happen, luckily enough. But I agree with you. I don't have much to add, really. I agree with you completely and utterly. And I think people who come away saying Dublin's a great place, it's not because of something they saw. It's because of the people they heard, the people they met, the pubs they were in, the music they heard, just the general atmosphere. And obviously, you need people for that. And I think it's a strange, because you know the city has been empty for a long, long time because of the pandemic and that, and it's only getting back on its feet again in a way. I don't want to live in a museum. I live in Dublin. I don't want to live in a museum where everything is protected, where you can't build anything. I think there should be a constant flow and a change, but it seems, I don't know. I still can't get my head around Merchants Arch, and I heard somewhere they're going to name the hotel the Merchants Arch. But there'll be no Merchants Arch.
There'll be no arch.
Doesn't make any sense whatsoever to do that. And the Cobblestone, one of the most famous pubs, quite rightly. And I love what I like about the Cobblestone is that they have the traditional music.
Yeah.
But you can still go down the back and have a chat and hear the music in the background.
And they've no tellies.
Well, another good thing. And again, that doesn't seem to make any sense to me at all. So I think there should be things that are beyond planning that should be protected. You should have some sort of a committee of people involved, from different ages, different backgrounds. I don't know how you'd legislate for it, but, there's so many streets in Dublin where there's no one living and there's empty floors above the shops.
Yeah.
I was in Copenhagen a few years ago, and I was just wandering around. So I had a lot of time just wandering around. And in the evening in particular, people were coming out of their flats and apartments and sitting in small pubs in the corner, and every place had a small shop, and you realise they all live in the city. They're not legging it for the train to go an hour and a half to the only place they can afford to live in. So I think between our obsession with owning property and and the gamble that renting is and the ludicrous level of renting, I don't know how people survive it all, but it can't be sustained forever. I mean, eventually something's going to give, and you're going to realize actually there's no one living in the city. And at the moment, the notion of building office blocks is just absurd, seeing as most people. I don't think that's the dream either. People don't want, some sort of hybrid will probably be the way with both the office and at home. working at home is in a way missing the point as well. It's a bit like talking about online education. It's brilliant. You don't have to go to college. Clearly, that's being said by somebody who never made any friends when they were in college.
Missing the
I
social
mean, I was
aspect
saying
of
to
it.
somebody, my closest friend, we were put sitting beside each other in school. No idea what we learned that day, but 50 years later, we're still meeting and, we're still great pals. And that was the point of school. Now, at this stage of my life, once you learn how to read and write, there's nothing much else. So, and you only realise that years and years later. So, yeah, there's something particularly awful about it. There was a stage where, the planners would have happily knocked down the whole city for roads, and that stopped. And some of the stuff that has been made and done, I think, is brilliant. Some of the planning has been really, really brilliant, and I couldn't fault. When I lived in Abbey Street for a while, late 80s, and I remember I was writing with a typewriter, old-fashioned ping, ding, ding typewriter. And the window was open, and I had a break. I went off and I got a cup of coffee somewhere, and I came back, and the white sheet of paper was grey from the smog. It was unbelievable. Like, you could see it all the time at certain days when it wasn't windy, and that's all gone, which is a great thing, So things do improve, but the whole idea that people can't live in the city is quite shocking, really. And knocking it for hotels, I think it's great that people want to come to Dublin. I think it's brilliant. I remember I worked in London in 1978, and I remember seeing a guy with a T-shirt, and he was actually selling stuff on Piccadilly to tourists. And he had a T-shirt, and it said, "No, I'm not a fucking tourist." And I thought that was the most hostile thing I'd ever seen in my life. Really, really hostile. And it's still there with Brexit and the rest of it, the distrust of the foreigner. And I'd hate if it was like that in Dublin, but the notion of building more and more hotels and Airbnb, having all the accommodation, so that people who actually, the accents, the Dublin accents, which are actually as important a part of the city as the GPO is, or the Liffey is, the accents, the sounds, the words in the air, they're the city. If you go to Glasgow or Liverpool, and you're sitting there, you come away, you had a great time. Part of it is because you heard all these accents. Or you go to Brooklyn, and you're having a terrific time because you think you're in a film because all of these accents are brilliant. Or anywhere in the world. And it'll be weird.
It's that
if
identity.
the accent, or people generally are pushed out of the city, and that's what'll.
Well,
That's
the way
what
it's
it
going.
just mystifies me. And some of the decisions, they wonder what? And the Merchants Arch, I don't know how that got through.
Yeah.
It's gone to on Barcelona approved it, like
So it's happening.
they approved it. I'm nearly sure they did. It's gone to them anyways. And then what I want to touch on is what they did. I was in Greece last year, and what they did over there. Anytime they were building something, obviously there's going to be thousands of archaeological things you can find in Greece. Like if they found anything, they had to stop building and excavate what they found, and then preserve that in what they found. So like if let's say they were building a metro station, there's metro stations all around Athens, and you go down and there's like ancient pots what they found.
Yeah.
Like that. And I was like, that's a great idea
They
because you're still getting,
incorporated it.
you're still getting what the
Yeah.
purpose was. So you're still getting your metro
Yeah.
station and you're getting a piece of history.
Yeah.
There's someone actually in Athens airport. There's a little
But
exhibit.
most cities seem to manage it really well. You go to
We don't-
Berlin and there's a big church that's left exactly as it was when the war ended.
Remember they
It's a good way to commemorate. Liverpool the same. So yeah, a lot of places are very good at incorporating the past with the present. Because Dublin's been here for more than 1,000 years, so you don't have to dig too deep to find history. But again, you wouldn't want, if you like, genuine progress halted just to protect all the past. You know what I mean?
No, definitely not.
So, but it shouldn't be all office blocks and hotels.
No, sure.
Definitely, it's just a money racket.
accommodation.
Like,
Down on the quays, remember they built like the council building and they found like a Viking
Yeah.
settlement or whatever, and they just built
Wood
it over.
quay.
They just built over it.
Yeah.
The fact that they're talking about knocking down the building in Moore Street where the leaders in 1916 hid out, and you're like,
Not very successfully, it has to be said.
well, no, yeah. In fairness, if you're gonna do a bank job, don't hide around the corner. You know what I mean? We went from the GP out to Moore Street. It wasn't that far.
Well, I read lots of descriptions of that. They didn't just hide out on Moore Street. When they left, the side entrance of the GPO, when they were abandoning the GPO, was on fire. And they came out onto Henry Street, and then they made their way up, and there was a barricade at the top of the street, you know, and there was slaughter when they came onto Moore Street, you know. So it's extraordinary. You could do an awful lot with that, bringing it back to life. Yeah, and it's an important, Moore Street is a really important part of the cultural history of the city, working class.
Yeah.
So my father used to, I know my mother was telling me, I don't remember him doing it at all, but he worked on Bolton Street, and once a week he'd have the sack bag, the cloth sack, and he'd get the vegetables and bring them home once a week, you know. And when I heard, I was quite surprised that my father would have done that, you know, because those, you know, back to the 50s or whatever, the men went off to work and the women did that sort of thing. So I thought, well, that complicates the picture a bit, the fact that my father did that, because he was going down Moore Street, you know. And we've all got great stories. And I remember when I was a kid, one of the great tests of whether you'd grown up or not was if you could go the one end of Moore Street to the other without somebody saying, do you want any bangers?
Yeah.
Do you know what that meant? If you could get to the other end, you were a man, because they weren't asking you anymore. And again, you don't want the place to be preserved, because I have good memories of Moore Street. But it seemed, I walked down Moore Street there recently, and it's a disaster. It's really,
in bits.
and it should, you know, it's historically, and it should be this present day. It's culturally really, really rich, not just because of 1916, but that's there as well, you know.
Well, there we are.
That's that boxed up. But anyways, isn't it? That was a good conversation there.
Yeah.
But any more suggestions?
No, that's all I had to grant me.
Thank fuck, is this podcast going on for hours already? Roddy's a busy man. Right, Roddy, tell us a bit about yourself. What was life like growing up?
Life was quite good growing up.
Where you
if
grew
I
up?
remember. I grew up in Kilbarrack on the north side. When I was a kid, when I was a very young kid, I grew up on Kilbarrack Road, which is kind of, well, it's not a straight line, but it's from the coast, and it could go all the way up to Coolock, you know, past Kilbarrack fire station. Hoke Junction Dart was the nearest one to it. The Dart wasn't there at the time. But when I was a kid, there was a row of houses that I lived on Kilbarrack Road, and there was a farm on the other side of the road. And my side of the road was Dublin 5 Postal District, and you crossed the road, you were in County Dublin. So it was literally the edge of the city. And you had the freedom of the world. Like, you could just come out and wander the farms. And, you know, it was Flood's farm. And I don't ever remember Mr. Flood objecting to the fact that there were gangs of kids wandering around. We never did any harm or whatever. And Barnwalls was further down the road. And it was a field. And then gradually, just when I was old enough to be interested in it, all the farmland was bought up either by the city corporation, as it was called, then the council, for what were called corporation houses or council houses. Or like, you know, Bayside. Yeah. Like that was built when I was a kid. And that was a playground. The building site was a playground when I was a kid. So it went from being almost like a village on the edge of the city to being, not the inner city, but a lot of people from the inner city came to live in Kilbarrack. Yeah. So it was brilliant. There were vivid moments, and I used a lot of them in my book, Paddy Clark, But the road outside was dug up, and they put this huge pipe down. And as a kid, you could run the length of the pipe without bending over. It was incredible. And the dare was to get down at one end of the pipe before they put the water in it, you know, and run the length of the pipe in pitch darkness at one point. But there'd be a shore just ahead, and you could get a little bit of light from the shore, and you could literally run the length of the road down the pipe. And you know, you can't do that now. It was just an amazing experience to store away. And Bayside, I remember myself and a friend climbed into the pipe in Bayside just when the houses there were some people living in the houses. And we were at a shore, we were under the ground at a shore. Shouting up. When anybody passed by, here. And they were looking, they had no idea. It was brilliant. It was actually brilliant. Mostly women with prams, you know, newly married, the pram. I must have terrified them in a way. Where's the voice coming from? That wasn't, you know, as a kid you don't realise that. But so it was good, and my family life, my home life was terrific. My father, you know, my parents were great. Yeah. They were very funny people. My mother was my mother was very precise in her memory, and she had great stories. Not all of them funny. And my father. My mother was very precise in her stories. My father embellished everything. He would I remember asking him about. I asked both of them about where they were born and what the conditions were. So my mother gave precise details as she knew them. My father, like he remembered his birth. you know, he remembered him. He remembered his father coming in to visit his mother in the rotunda, and he remembered being brought to be baptized. So my mother was giving details that she had heard. My father spoofed.
And you think you kind of are a mixer, like you're the
In
middle of that.
retrospect, I might be.
Yeah.
In retrospect, I might be. And they loved language. They got great crack when they heard a word being used in an unusual way. And it often then ended up being used in the house quite a lot, So they were good crack. And I remember my father used to change the lyrics of songs just for the crack as well. There was a Dr. Zhivago, the film. The theme music was a thing called... I can't remember what the song is called, but it was a big hit in the 1960s. It was Somewhere My Love, and I can't remember what the next line was, but my father used to sing Somewhere My Love, up to your arse in snow, because it was set in Russia in the wintertime. And he'd do that all the time, change lyrics of songs just for the crack. So, I mean, in many ways, and the primary school I went to was Scolasum in Raheny. There were no schools in Kilbarrack at the time. They came later. And my memories of Scolasum in Raheny are very, very warm and very friendly. And I went there, visited there. There was a school for the little kids, and then there was a school for the boys, And I visited both. And I felt really good walking in the door, and there was no bad memories lurking in the corner. It all felt good, and the buildings were still intact, and so my memories of primary school would be particularly warm. So I've very little to complain about really in my childhood. I think, and particularly, I think looking back as a writer, that 1 foot in the countryside, 1 foot in the city, watching the place change as I grew up, and then when I started teaching. I went to the new community school that was bang in the middle of all these new houses. And that really was a head opener for me as well, because these kids were a bit younger than me, so I didn't know them. I was 21. I was teaching then for 17-year-olds. So it's only a 4-year gap. As the older you get, it's nothing. But at the time, it's 4 big years in your life, So I didn't really know these people. And then I went up and started teaching. And again, as I said, it was a head opener. At the time, I wasn't thinking of being a writer, or if I did, it was a really vague thing, like being a footballer,
Yeah.
But probably the perfect job for a writer to have in many ways, because you hear so many different people, so many different voices all day.
Sorry, were you primary or secondary school teaching?
Secondary.
So what subjects were you teaching?
In the good years, English with a bit of geography, and the bad years, geography with a bit of English.
Sorry, so you were saying it's the perfect job to start.
I don't know if it's perfect, but it was it was brilliant. I mean, I liked the job per se, and I don't know. I'd be very close to retirement now. I probably could have taken, if I was still a teacher, or I could have taken early retirement. I'm not sure. Would I have been as happy?
Yeah.
I did 14 years. Would I have been as happy after 34 years? Who knows? I don't know. That might be just a decision in some ways. I don't know. But the 14 years I did it, I mean, I was really enjoyed it. And
did you want to be a teacher when you were younger?
No.
When did that come into play?
In part, really, after school, I went to UCD and did a degree in English and geography. And it was one of the options. And so I decided, well, I'll have a go and see what it's like. So I actually went around the corner to see if they'd take me to what they called the H-dip back then, higher diploma in education, and you had to go to the school to do a few hours in the morning, and then you went to UCD across the other side of the city in the afternoon. So they took me in, and they then started when there was a teacher absent, they'd give you the H-dips, their hours to teach, and
You were the absent
paid for it.
teacher. They got an awful life. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, but the subjects that I was supposed to, metalwork, woodwork, religion, home economics. Basically, you were just babysitting until the teacher
Yeah,
came
yeah.
back.
Came back, yeah.
But actually, just being in the company of all these kids, I just thought it was brilliant, I really did. From the first day, maybe the second day, I just thought, this is great. This is
Yeah.
really, really great. So Yeah.
And then you were saying, like, when you were a teacher at 21, then there was this dream of being a writer, but it was like being a footballer. When did the dream start, like, coming into play then? And did you know since you were a kid that you wanted to be a
I
writer?
became a big. I didn't learn. Again, I don't want to sentimentalize. And sometimes when we're trying to remember accurately what happened a long time ago, it's hard not to, sentimentalize. Or
Yeah.
basically, we make it up, a lot of our memories, I think. But if memory serves me right, I wasn't learning how to read in school. It was a big class. I was very happy in school, but I wasn't learning how to read. And my mother realised that. And she taught me how to read using comic books, the old-fashioned, like the Beano and the Dandy, those comic books. Perfect way to learn how to read, with the speech bubbles over the head of desks.
Yeah.
You know who's saying what. Yeah.
And so I copped onto it then. And once I started reading, today now I never go anywhere without a book, And if I miss the bus, I don't mind because I'm going to read a page or so waiting for the next one. Or if a plane is delayed or something, I don't care because I've got a book. And I wake up early in the morning and I read, and it's a vital part of my life, reading. And I think it goes back to that because I really appreciated learning how to read, I think. So there was a vague itch in the back of my mind thinking I wouldn't mind having a stab at that to see. But 1982, as a teacher, I had June, July and August off,
Yeah.
And I went to London, got a bed sit in Wood Green in North London. And the following morning, I went to the local library and I just started writing. And I said, I'll stay here for the morning. And that's, by the end of the summer, I had a whole pile of copybooks full of what I now know was rubbish. But I got into the routine of writing because it's kind of the boring fact of writing that you can't do it unless you sit by yourself and put hours into it. And by the end of the summer, I had trained myself in a way to do that.
So that gave you the itch.
Yeah, without denying. Like the World Cup was on in 1982, so I managed to do a bit of work in the afternoons or the morning and the afternoons, and then go watch a match. So I didn't deny myself the football.
Yeah.
And I went to a lot of gigs and I went to a lot of films, and I did. I enjoyed myself in London, but I think it was a good thing to do because I got away from friends and that sort of distraction, and just got into the discipline of writing, and then I never lost it really. It was a good while before I had anything published, but I used to do a bit every evening.
But
I
it's
didn't
good
have
that you didn't
family or
take
anything.
all that away, because I think if you deprive yourself of too much and you're just focused on writing, you'll end up hating it quick.
Well, I think in retrospect, again, I can only talk on my own behalf, but you have to be kind of kind to yourself as well. You learn tricks to get the work done without actually killing yourself, and as well as that, I think, it's all about experience. So if you stay in a room all the time and deny yourself experience, you're denying yourself things to write about, really.
Inspiration.
Yeah, absolutely. So it took me a good while to find anything worth writing about, I've got to say, or finding something that I wanted really, really to write about. But I got into the discipline of it and just stayed at it, really. And I think that's the big difference between possibly me and somebody who wants to be a writer but never gets around to it because they don't sit and do it. And there's no glamour.
Yeah.
And nobody gives a shite. That's really important to know, that really no one gives a shite except you. And if you can live with that and you're happy with that and you're not, then it's grand, really.
Yeah, it makes sense when you say it like
No,
that.
it does. You have to be your own. You have to be prepared for
You're
the
your own
criticism.
boss, that's
yeah,
it,
But you have to be prepared for the criticism as well. Like, you're putting all these hours into this, and you give it to someone, and you're like, it's actually not that good.
It's
you
a
have to be
tricky
prepared.
thing. Giving stuff to friends is tricky because they're your friends, you
Yeah.
know. So chances are they won't give you an honest assessment of it, really. And then there's envy comes into it as well,
Yeah.
And envy, I'd recognise envy myself. You're envious of people, so that without intending to, you might give them a dig. I don't mean a physical dig.
Yeah.
Without intending to, or even being conscious of it. So actually showing the work, that's another thing. The decision or the ability to know when a piece of work is finished and ready for somebody else to read it. And I think sometimes people are a bit too eager to show stuff and they talk about it. Or as I've seen, stick it up on Facebook. The
Yeah.
last place on earth you should do that, So it's the ability to know when it's done. Or it's done as much as you can do it, so then you show it to somebody to read. But people, I think, are too keen and eager to get it done as quickly as possible. And probably facial expressions then from people who are
Yeah.
telling them how wonderful it is while avoiding eye contact. It must be very dispiriting.
But you not think as well it's a mix of like that Irish thing where we don't let people get too big for their boots.
Yeah, I've no problem with that.
Yeah. You actually, I heard this story from Tommy Turner, but you got a nice humbling before.
Yeah, I didn't need it, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But it's a precious memory. I thought it was just brilliant. It's a good while ago now. It must be possibly 25 years, maybe. Yeah, possibly. I'd arranged. Both myself and another friend of mine, we both work alone at home. And we were saying how much we miss going for a pint, you know, maybe on a Friday with people from work. So we said, we'll do it, you know, in our own sad way, we'll do it. So we decided we'd go into town and we'd meet on the Dart and probably go start in Mulligan's on Poolbeg Street, you know. But I was so eager, I got on the Dart before him. So I was waiting outside Tara Street Station, leaning against the wall. No phones to distract you back in those days or anything, so you had to rely on what you were way more entertaining.
Your imagination.
Anyway, so there I was leaning against the wall, waiting for my friend, and a gang of lads wearing the 25 years ago equivalent of yourselves, the tracksuits, you know, walking like pigeons, you know, the way the...
Throwing shapes.
Yeah, and 4 or 5 of them passing me by, and one of them broke away from the group and he came straight up to me, right up to my face, and he said, "Are you Roddy Doyle?" And I said, "I am, yeah." And he says, "So what?"
Just letting you know.
It was brilliant. And he just turned around and joined the lads and they moved on. I kind of really wanted to go, "Hang on, you asked me." You know, I wasn't telling you. But it was so funny, you know. It was just so, and still is so funny. And I don't know, I've told that story possibly hundreds of times now because, you know, I told it on to Tommy and then you hear it and you have to tell it again. But it's still so funny. And it does capture, in a way, I think, Dublin. If I was asked, tell us a story that in a way captures why you love Dublin, it would be that story, I think, because the put down, you know, 2 words. And if I was writing it, it would be so WHA apostrophe.
Definitely, yeah.
So what? You know?
We don't
But it
do
was really-
P's in the
he
Dublin
wasn't
language.
aggressive, you know.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, you know, so what? He wasn't spitting at me in any sense. It was just, he knew he was being funny.
Yeah.
And that's what I really liked that, you know. I thought that was brilliant. It was you know, it's not impossible that it would happen in Liverpool or, you know.
Yeah.
But it just seems to me something in the Dublin air.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That might be just sentimentality, but if it is, I don't care. It's grand.
But I think I don't, it's not really what I think, it's a fact that you kind of encapsulate that perfect in your storytelling.
Thank you.
Like you have that Dublin working class, like the dialogue that you write, you know what I mean? So that obviously had to come from, you're writing about Barrytown.
Barrytown, yeah. I wanted to write, I didn't want to use the name of a real place because I actually wasn't basing characters on real people.
Yeah.
So I thought if, for example, when I was writing The Commitments, these characters, Jimmy Rabbit and Deco Cuff, the characters who were in the band, or the manager of the band, and Joey the Lips, they weren't people I knew. I was just making them up. So I thought, well, if I make them live in Kilbarrack, immediately people are going to be wondering,
think,
who's
he on about? Yeah.
Who's that? And I just thought, no, that would just distract. And also, I was teaching in Kilbarrack. My parents were living in Kilbarrack, and I was thinking, I don't want to, you know, I don't want
Cause hassle, yeah.
yeah, a bit of grief. So I just thought, well, I could add an extra station to the Dart, you know. And there's an American band, Steely Dan.
Yeah, reeling in the years.
Well, there you go. That was on their first album, and this record, Barrytown, is the fourth. Well, you know what a record is? Well, roundy
I do
thing,
indeed,
you know,
yeah.
Yep.
The wax.
It's the 4th track on the first side of their 3rd record, Pretzel Logic, which was released in 1974, and I bought. And it's one of the best albums ever made, and Barrytown is that track. And it sounds Irish. It's actually a small town, and I met yesterday a man who lives there. It's a very small town in upstate New York, about 2 hours above the city of New York, you know. And there's one in Wales, I think, and there's
One in New Zealand.
Yeah. And there may be, I'm not aware of anyone in Ireland. But the 2 fellas who co-wrote the Commitment script with me, Dick Clement and Ian Lafrene, when they came to Dublin first, they got into a taxi in Dublin Airport and asked them to bring them to Barrytown. And they spent most of the afternoon trying to find Barrytown. I'm sure the taxi driver was
loving it.
Yeah. Like the, you know, the money raker.
Yeah.
But they knew it was somewhere between because there's a song in the book, The Commitments, where it names the dart stations, including Barrytown. You know, so I knew it was somewhere between Kilbarrack and Bayside.
Yeah.
But it was just this mythical land that doesn't exist, so they could never pin it down really. So, but it freed me up, and you know, so if I have a character turning left, it's because I want them to turn left, not because there's a left turn there.
Yeah.
It suited me, and I made up a fictional pub, and I could do what I wanted with it. You know, so it was a balance between trying to make it as real as you possibly could, and then also making it up so that you could have the freedom to do what you wanted to do. So
But the thing is,
yeah, it
like-
worked out well. I mean, that was if you like, almost a whimsical moment sometime in possibly February 1986. And 35 years later, you're asking me about Barrytown.
Yeah.
You know, it's brilliant.
We are reading the stuff that these people are saying, and it's like a person has actually said it. Because like we know, like the stuff that they're saying, we could picture someone saying that it's common stuff, day to day lingo.
Definitely, that's what we were talking about earlier on outside. When you read the book, you can clearly tell, innit? It's literally, you can nearly picture it in your own gaff.
Well,
Do you get me?
yeah, well, it's lovely to hear you say that. There was a lot of, at the beginning, particularly because the first book was The Commitments, or the first book that where I knew what I was doing. It was the first book that was published, was The Commitments. And I did a lot of experimenting with how to try and get the Dublin accent on paper. And I went overboard at times so that you'd really, it was too much hard work. You'd read a sentence and you'd think, what's he saying there? And that was me, I'd written it. And I come back the day later and I said, I don't remember what I'm trying to say there. So, you know, you make compromises so that you can read it, you get a sense of the Dublin accent without it being hard work, you know.
Yeah.
So a lot of trial and error, a lot of experimentation. But because I think I was doing it for the first time and there was a little feeling that I'm doing something that I shouldn't be doing. It's like using bad language when you're a little kid and
Yeah.
wondering, is anybody going to hear you? You know, I wasn't a little kid anymore and I could say what I wanted. But it was like deliberately misspelling words, and I was an English teacher.
Yeah.
So I decided, like, if anybody said at the beginning of a sentence, anyway, I'd add an N, A-N-N-Y, and it became anyway. And you have to set it, there's no choice. That's the way it is, anyway. And sometimes anyways, and an anyways. And you know, experiment with that. And if it looked clear enough, I'd say, yeah, I've got away with that. The problem then is that overdoing it, putting too much of it in.
Yeah.
But that's, again, trial and error. But it's a very short book. And it didn't take me all that long to write The Commitments. But a lot of it ended up in the bin because of that.
You noticed how he writes his books. What was it that
Right.
you called out about the books?
The way there's no chapters in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some do, yeah.
Some books do, yeah.
Yeah.
No, because I was looking at the Paddy Clark Ha 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 has no
Yeah.
chapters in it, and then
No.
the Van has no chapters in it either.
There are breaks in
With it.
Paddy Clark. Paddy Clark is the shape it is because I wrote Paddy Clark after I'd finished the first three, you know, The Commitments, The Snapper and The Van. Same family, really, the same kind of world, the same characters in a lot of cases. And I wanted to try something else, you know. And I thought I became the father of a baby at that time, and I was still working full time. And suddenly, the circumstances of my life were completely different, and I was busy in a way that I never was before, you know, because I was also writing. I can't remember the script for The Commitments was coming out. Like my head was full.
Yeah.
And then there was another baby, you know. So I was writing this stuff and grabbing any moment I could, 20 minutes before going to work, or the odd time when the two babies would fall asleep at the same time, I could go into the room and do a bit of work. And after a while, probably because I'd had a baby, I was thinking of my own childhood. I decided, well, I'm going to write from the point of view of a 10-year-old boy. And I really tried to get to as near as I could to being a 10-year-old boy. And I remember going to my parents' house and going into the kitchen, and it was more or less the same as it had been when I was a kid, and getting down on my hands and knees just to remember what it was, the size of it when I was a much smaller person. And you know, you'd put your hand up to open the fridge, whereas, you know, as an adult, you won't,
Reach
it's more
down
near,
there,
you
yeah.
know. So little things like that. And then I realised, like, you know, when you're looking at kids, small kids, if they're wandering around town, they don't look at the big things or the important things. They look at the chewing gum on the ground. They'll start counting the cigarette butts on the ground. They don't differentiate between the big stuff and the small stuff. And that's why Paddy Clark has no chapters, because he's going from joke. He hears a joke and he puts the joke down, and then something really important is happening in his life, but he's not aware of it because conscious of it. His parents are breaking up, but it takes him a long time to see that.
Yeah.
And that's and in a way, that's because I had so little time to write it, that when I had it all done, I printed it all out and got down literally on the floor of my office and began to rearrange everything to see if I could have some sort of shape on it. And actually I realised then the fact that I had very little time each day to write was a good thing, because it actually was kind of an accurate way of capturing the head of a 10-year-old boy.
Yeah.
Do you know? So it worked out as what was in many ways a pain in the arse was actually a virtue. It worked
Lesson
out
in
quite well.
disguise.
Yeah,
And it's
absolutely.
the same with the van as well, with the no chapters, which
Yeah.
I've been reading.
Yeah,
So-
I didn't want to. I just wanted. Again, there are breaks, but I wanted it to flow. You know, just
Yeah.
to flow.
Which it
as one.
does, yeah. But I was just, I said to Calvin, I was like, why the fuck is there no chapters in it?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I can't say to him, well, I'm at chapter 5, I'm at page
There's
fucking
sometimes,
200.
you know, sometimes you become aware, as I became aware, you can break the rules. That's one of the jobs, I think, as a...
It's your book.
Yeah, I want to, and I don't want to sound pretentious, but if you're an artist in any way, one of the things you want to do, one of the reasons you become an artist because you love art. Do you know what I mean? So I
Yeah.
loved reading, but at the same time, you want to be your own
Stand out.
artist. And you want... So I decided, well, I'm going to write books and stories set in working class Dublin. I don't want formal chapters as such.
Yeah.
I don't want it to be like a 19th century
Yeah.
novel. I love Charles Dickens, but I don't want to be Charles Dickens.
Yeah.
So I one way of being a bit different, and it's not revolutionary because there's loads of books that don't have chapters, was not to have chapters.
But it's just not the common way to go about it, so you just...
Yeah, and after a while then, you become... I've been lucky, I've written 12 novels. And after a while, you want to break your own rules.
Yeah.
Do you know? Because I
Change
don't
your
want to
up.
be stuck in a rut writing
Yeah.
the same thing all the
exactly, yeah.
time. So that's the next challenge. And that's one of the reasons why some of the later books do have chapters.
Yeah.
Do you know? Because I decided, well, I'll break my own rule and then go back to
And
chapters.
go back to that and just mix and match and
Yeah.
do whatever the fuck
Yeah.
you want. Cause
Good to
it's
have
your
that
book.
freedom, isn't it? So you're in the middle of teaching, Roddy, and you're
Just
writing
going
these.
back a little bit now, yeah. Just
Yeah.
now taking it back.
Yeah.
Well, you're writing these masterpieces at this
very
way.
much.
Well, they are, aren't they? They're the cornerstone of
They turned out to
I
be,
can't,
yeah.
Irish
answer that.
culture.
I can't answer that question, but I accept the compliment.
You don't need to answer the question; it's a fact. But so obviously we knew you were coming on. Me and Terence are having a bit of a crash course in what you've written. In the van, you make a reference to Dunphy because it's the backdrop is Italian 90,
Yeah.
and you say one of the specials is, "Can I get a single about a bag of chips?" That was something we talked about before. And a Dunphy, which was a sausage.
Yeah, in batter.
Yeah, but right now I might sound a bit stupid because this might be fairly obvious when you do explain it. But when people are reading stuff, you're saying like, "Oh, they are picking up the newspaper and saying, give us a deco. I want to have a deco at that."
Yeah.
What does that mean?
Look,
Yeah, why?
I don't know. Where is it? Have a deco?
I've
I
never
grew
heard of
up
that.
with that phrase. My father used to say it.
See,
Have
I
a
was
deco.
afraid.
He'd say it for fun as much as anything else. You
Yeah.
know, he again, as I said earlier, he loved him and my mother. They loved language and messing with words.
So you don't know where that actually came from?
I don't. Somebody else could explain that to you. But
Yeah.
you know, when I think about, I never thought about it before actually. But when I think normally you can explain things if you give them a bit of thought. But actually, how a deco
Yeah.
became a bit of a look.
See,
I
that's
don't
grand.
know.
I was afraid that something was going to happen that way. You'd be like, "How did you not know it meant this?" And I'd be like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." But now that you
I
don't
didn't
know, I
realise it
feel
was an exam.
Yeah.
Well, I was hoping it'd make
it's
me
your
feel
bleeding
stupid.
book.
There was a quiz in one of the newspapers when I was 60. There was a quiz in one of the newspapers on the website. You know, 10 questions.
Yeah.
I got 8 out of 10.
And you're all about your stuff.
Yeah. So other people will do much better than me.
Yeah.
Because when I'm finished the book, I tend not to.
Go back to it.
No.
Yeah, that's the same with us. We don't listen to this podcast.
Wise move. Wise move.
But another thing that happened was I said on a previous episode, A1 Sharon,
Yeah.
and it was about the snapper. Look, Terence is raging. But Terence had never heard of the snapper.
Yeah.
And
I didn't have a telly growing up before. I'm not like... Didn't just not watch your stuff, you know? Didn't watch anything.
it's
You
like-
missed a lot.
We just
Yeah.
looked at static.
he didn't boycott your stuff. It's just general. But
Yeah.
tell him what you thought.
What, A1 Chardon? Yeah,
Yeah.
I just thought, like, So, obviously, I've heard A1 Chardon over the years. I just thought you'd put A1 and a common name after it.
All right, A1 Sharon.
Yeah, so A1 Anto, A1 Chardon, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
Now, I'd only heard Chardon over the years, but I was like, yeah, Chardon's a common name. So I thought that's what it was. I didn't realise that was actually iconic.
Yeah, and that's what we're saying is that's how much of an impact your subs that they're having on pop culture.
You'd have
That
no
parents
idea
actually thought
how
that's just a
many-
normal
you'd
saying.
have no idea how many women called Sharon have cursed me for calling.
But this is
imagine
another
so,
thing I wanted
yeah.
to call you out on. Why is the characters called Chardon and Darden? Because my in-laws, I said, were from Wexford. They always get me to say Chardon because how they say it in the snapper.
That's exactly
And
why.
I was thinking, even as you were talking, as you were saying Chardon, I was wondering if I was to do it again, would I try to spell that
Yeah,
Chardon instead of Sharon? But it's virtual impossibility.
well, it's the same way with Tardens,
Tardens,
and
yeah.
Chardon. Like it's you really hit the nail on the head with that one. You know quite well.
Good choice, but nevertheless, women called Sharon, I've made their lives a misery, apparently. You know, it wasn't my intention.
You're making it hard on us as well because it's like the little pony trick that I have. Right, get Calvin down, get him to say it. Go say it now. Chardon.
Probably the only reason you're still
Yeah,
together.
probably is. Yeah. But now, in fairness, they're big fans of your work as well. So
That's nice.
see, now they'll
Yeah.
be like, Jesus, now Calvin got to call him out on that.
Yeah.
You wanted to say something?
Yeah, no. So I just wanted to take it back a little bit because we were jumping ahead of schedule there on the timeline and all already, yeah? So you said you started teaching at 21, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah, and then you were teaching for 14 years.
Yeah.
But you brought the commitments out in the meantime.
yeah.
How many years after you were teaching?
Commitments was myself and a friend of mine, John Sutton, self-published, as they call it, the Commitments in 1987. So that's 8 years.
8 years after you were teaching.
Yeah.
And then you continued teaching for another 6 then.
Yeah.
Was
Yes,
the
I
commitments
did.
the only one you brought out while you were still
No,
teaching?
the Snapper came out in 1990 and the Van came out in 1990.
So they all come out before
Those
you
three
stopped teaching?
came out and the film came out and I had a couple of plays on in the SFX Centre, which was on Upper Sherrard Street. It's an apartment block now, but it was brilliant.
Surprise.
Surprise, yeah. It was an amazing venue. It was the parish hall, really, for Gardner Street Parish. And it was an amazing venue. I saw the Clash there and the Smiths and the Pretenders. Amazing band. And the stage was huge, absolutely huge. But it's gone now. But I saw that all happened when I was still teaching. And I think in ways, I didn't want to leave teaching because I really enjoyed the teaching. But it also, you know, it kept me feet on the ground. I don't know. You know, trying to remember what it might have been like when I was much, much younger. Say, when the Commitments had its premiere in the Savoy in Dublin. An amazing experience. The minute the song at the very beginning, before the film, even Treat Her Right. Robert Arkin singing Treat Her Right. He played Jimmy Rabbit and he's singing that song. And people were up out of their seats before the film even started because that song is so brilliant.
Yeah.
And such a great, great atmosphere. And it was a brilliant night. But I was into work the following morning. I was on the Dart.
We're saw ahead.
No, not really. No, with a big head, perhaps,
Yeah.
you know. But actually going into work was the best thing I could have done in many, many ways, in retrospect. That might be just stupid, but for a long time, I saw no reason why I couldn't be both a teacher and a writer, you know. And it was only when life got really, when there weren't enough hours in the day, I really
Yeah.
had to make my mind up.
Something
you
had
know.
to
I was
go.
going to say, you must have been taking up a serious amount of hours anyways. Doing
I
the
find
writing,
it sometimes when I look back and, you know, now at this stage of my life, 6 years doesn't seem like a long time, but when you're living them back then, it is a long time. But when I look, say, between 1987 and 1993, and I can make a list of the things that I did in those 6 years at the same time as becoming a father and all that, and teaching, I find it hard to imagine. But, you know, if I look back at even 6 active years now, I still get a lot done in those years. I seem to be I'm very disciplined, you know, so I work every day. I don't work weekends, but I'm total self-employed. Nobody could give a toss if I go up to the office or not, but I always do. Do you know what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
up to me. So, but it was an amazing time. But it's hard now looking back on it just to calculate in a way or account for how come I got so much done. You know, it's really, And I didn't have, as well as that, the sheer labour of it, because I wrote the commitments by hand and then I typed it out. But I did lots of drafts. Now you can do it with, on a laptop in a fraction of the time.
Yeah.
And it's actually a thing I miss about the old days. For example, the noise of an electric typewriter. It sounds like work.
Yeah.
Ka-dunk, ka-dunk,
The
ka-dunk.
labour overall,
Yes.
is it more rewarding when you get to the end of a page?
In a
and
way,
you're like-
yeah. And I believe there's an app you can get and put in your laptop that'll give you the sound.
And the little ding at the end.
Yeah, which I just thought, no, that's just silly. So I didn't do it. But I did see, I can't remember, whenever I'm in, when there's a book tour or something like that, sometimes I'm only in a city for 24 hours. But if I have a couple of hours, I always try and go somewhere to see something. And I think I was in San Francisco, and I went to a museum, and there was an exhibition of old typewriters. And I was almost tearful looking at them, and the temptation to go onto eBay or something or buy an old one just to hear the ka-dunk, ka-dunk, ka-dunk. But it's not, obviously it's
not
a bit
efficient.
daft. But it was a brilliant sound, because I wrote by hand, I knew when I was making that sound, I was nearly done. This was the last hurrah. So, but it's just. I've always been, sometimes the word prolific is used as if it's an insult somehow or other, but I've always had ideas queuing up, really. Like, sometimes you look over the skyline over Dublin Bay and you can see the planes.
Yeah.
Before the pandemic, the planes getting ready to land, And I think sometimes the ideas were a bit like that, So when there was one, I was finishing one, I was itching to get dug into another one,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the way it worked out back then.
Yeah. And you were saying earlier there about the commitments, the snapper and the van, and how they're similar actors in the working class thing. Why did you stop that? Why did you move away from that then?
Well, in a way, I didn't. I just decided to get out of that particular house. If you
Because
like,
the three of them would have been
the
successful.
snapper and the van. Well, the snapper is, set so much in the house, and then a lot of the van. I'm talking about the books now.
Yeah.
Because the books are there before the films are ever
Yeah,
made,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And I just wanted to get out of that house, and then I thought, well, I'll go back. There's a Dublin writer, Dermot Bulger. He's brilliant, and he wrote this fantastic. He's from Finglas, and he wrote this fantastic novel called The Mother's Daughter. And there's a long passage in the book where he talks about the layers underneath in Finglas. So it's not just today.
Yeah.
There's history underneath it, and history. So I think in a way that's what got me back to writing about Paddy Clark in Barrytown 25 years before, or it would have been, 20 years before the other books were set, when it's still being built.
Yeah.
And his playground, like mine, was the building sites, So, and then the next book I wrote after that was The Woman Who Walked Into Doors, and that's
Yeah.
about a woman who's in a violent marriage.
I just want to talk to you about that.
And I always saw her as not literally being living next door to the rabbits who were in the first three books, but maybe living on the same road.
Yeah.
But whereas if you went into the rabbit household, that word functional, it's a chaotic, but it's a loving house. And at the end of the snapper, the baby, I think, is lucky to be going into that house.
Yeah.
Because it'll be cherished and loved. And I knew that, if I started insisting that every household is like that, there's a dishonesty to that.
It's a fairy tale then.
Yeah. So that not every story is a successful one.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, I'll go down the road a bit and in through another door. And just to see if I can. This was the book I started writing when I gave up teaching. So I went from grabbing moments and the holidays, when you're teaching, you have a lot of holidays, so you can get a lot of work done. But I had all the time in the world. I had, all day, and the days felt long. And I thought, well, if I'm going to write, I decided I'm going to write from the point of view of a woman. And I couldn't have done it, I think, if I'd been teaching, because I wouldn't have had the time and I wouldn't have been able to accept that most of what I'm writing here is rubbish and I'm going to have to throw it in the bin while I try to get to know the character. So there was a lot more getting to know that character involved. But I wasn't abandoning that world. I was just looking at it from the eyes of a different character,
Yeah.
And the one after that, then I decided I'd go right back to the beginning of the 20th century. At first, just for the sheer heck of it.
Just
So-
because you can.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you about the topics that you're writing about. So, in The Woman That Walked Into Doors, you're writing about a woman who's suffering in domestic abuse.
Yeah.
In The Snapper, you're writing about a girl who is going through an estranged pregnancy. In the van, it's a middle-aged man who's at the losing his job and probably for a middle-aged man to lose his job in a household like that, that's a sense of purpose. I put the bread on the table kind of thing.
It's his self-definition.
Yeah,
Definition is his
and
job,
he's,
yeah.
and he's
pride.
kind of looking for his next meaning. So like them 3 topics there, yeah, they're like stuff when, especially at the time when you're writing them, but that's stuff that everybody can relate to, but it's just not spoken about. So do you not think, like, are they kind of ahead of that time in a way?
Well, I always felt that, I've always felt that working class people are way ahead of the posse when it comes to social change, because when
Yeah.
I was writing The Snapper, that whole idea of legitimacy and illegitimacy
Yeah,
was taken off the statute books. It became, there was no such thing as a legitimate or an illegitimate child in 1987 when I was writing that book. But I think working class people had made their mind up about that decades before,
yeah,
and just because it became sanctioned by the state made no difference. So what I wanted to do, among the other things with The Snapper, was to kind of celebrate. Now, the circumstances of her pregnancy are unfortunate, and I'd have to be, if I was writing the book today, I'd have to write it differently.
definitely. Yeah, I don't
But-
think it aged well. That circumstance wouldn't go down well now.
Yeah, but once it's accepted, I think that this was written, that particular passage,
Yeah.
probably late 1986, early 1987. But I would, the temptation to rewrite it isn't there. I think it'd be stupid. But there's a lot of other stuff. You know, the way then she takes command of her story and she says it's a Spanish sailor who's the father. I think she could still get away with that, but it'd be much harder for it because including her, they'd all have mobile phones, they'd all have Instagram, they'd all have Twitter, there'd be, and if it came to any sort of criminal thing, there'd be CCTV footage. So it'd be it's a more difficult story to tell,
Now,
but you
yeah.
could still tell it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't think, in a way, it wasn't that with The Snapper. It ends up that she really wants the child, and she insists that the child comes into the house and into the world under her conditions.
Yeah.
Having, if you like, the initial event wasn't as she would have wanted it. That sounds,
Yeah.
veiled, or it sounds a bit
In a way,
weak,
it's just
but it'll do. But so that she takes command of the story, and then it becomes almost a celebration. And then
Yeah.
the father, he becomes almost overnight this modern man, and he's reading every woman. Interestingly, I'll tell you how far, when we were making the film in 1982, in 1992, there was a referendum about abortion information, whether it would be illegal to have books and magazines in the country that had information about abortion. And The Snapper, there's a scene in The Snapper where he goes into the library and takes out every woman. And that scene was shot the day after the referendum. And as it happened overwhelmingly, people voted in favour of allowing books with abortion information, right? So the scene could go ahead in Raheny Library. It was shot in Raheny Library. If it had gone the other way, they wouldn't have been able to shoot that scene in Raheny Library because they would have had to take every woman off the shelf.
Madness.
Right? That's 1992. So that's not prehistory. That's 29 years ago. So that, if you like, that's the type of world in which I was writing the book. And so the things have changed. And, at the very, very beginning of the book, Sharon says, and she says it immediately, when Jimmy, her father, says, "Do you want to keep it?" And, then she realizes what he's saying. And she says, "Abortion's murder." She says that in 1986 when I wrote it. If I was writing it today, she wouldn't say that.
No.
She wouldn't say it because she wouldn't believe it.
Yeah.
She wouldn't think it. And regardless of what your beliefs are, she wouldn't think it. That character
Yeah.
wouldn't think it. So there's things that I'd have to do differently right through the book. Obviously, the big one is the sexual encounter, and how do you deal with that? How do you create an episode that is consensual but still at the same time leads to regret?
Yeah. That's what I wanted to say to you there. Isn't nearly just the fact that that's kind of like just a grey cloud over the plot, that you just need Sharon to be pregnant. Like how she ended up pregnant is like, it doesn't really matter.
It's a cold way of looking at it, but I think a lot of things, when you're writing, you're wondering, you're going to have a character murdered, and you're wondering, how will I do that? And it's not what you think in your real world.
Yeah.
And it's the same in a way. It's all about words and choosing the words and choosing the right words that tell the story. And as I said, I felt I did it in a clear way back in 1986. And then when they were filming it in what was the old Shielding, the car park at the old Shielding Hotel in Raheny, it's now gone. It's a block of apartments, believe it or not. They shot the scene at different angles. And they ended up, if I'm remembering right, with the scene is shot where the camera is below them. Whereas they also shot it from a crane where the camera was above them. And it looked much more violent in a way, or much more forceful than was wanted. So it's still, you know, an unpleasant moment. That's, again, a weak way of describing it. But if I was to write it now,
Completely
I'd have to
different.
go back a bit
Yeah.
and rethink it and come up with different words, you know,
Yeah.
to make sure it's absolutely clear that this is, as I say, consensual.
Yeah.
But then it would have to be accepted that sometimes, you know, we do consent to events that we later regret.
Yeah.
You know, that they're not mutual. You know, you
Yeah.
can't, you know, you can say, yes, I'll do this, or yes, I'm happy
Doesn't
with
mean
this,
you're gonna have a good
and
time.
then change your mind later on.
Yeah.
And that's the quandary that she would be in. But having found herself in that quandary, she decides, I'm going to do something about this.
Yeah.
Rather than, I think what made the Snapper a bit different, than rather than go into a mother and baby's home or disappear for a while and come back and have the baby handed over to some other family, she decides, no, it's mine. And actually, she gets no argument from the family from that point of view. It's just then the comedy is around who's the dad.
Yeah.
That's,
That's how they shut me up.
That's that covered up
Yeah.
anyway. So Calvin, shut your mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Do
right.
you have
grand.
something you want to?
Yeah, Rosie.
That's where I wanted to move on to.
Yeah,
Because
Rosie.
we're jumping forward a good bit here. So,
Do you
yes.
reckon we're not to jump forward about late 40? Yeah.
well,
Quite a while, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's some of your more recent stuff.
Yeah, that was filmed in 2018.
Yeah.
It's just relatable to so much that's happening. that's going
Unfortunately,
on.
yeah.
Yeah,
It
unfortunately
hasn't
is the right
changed.
word. But that's what I just want to ask your thought process through that, Rosie, and what made you want to do that.
A couple of years before the film was made, I was in the kitchen, half listening to the radio. The news. All right, I don't listen to the, you know, the sparky lads in the mornings. I
Yeah.
don't listen to them at all. Can't cope with them. So I listen,
Too enthusiastic
news.
way.
If I listen at all, I listen to the news. And there was a woman on the news describing her day before, the day before. And she described how she'd woken up in a hotel and she'd spent a big chunk of the day getting herself and her 5 children across the city to the places where 3 of them went to school, I think, and the other 2 weren't in school yet. And that she had to spend the rest of the day trying to find somewhere to spend the following night. And she was brilliant. She was very calm, very clear. What really gave me, if you like, pause for thought was she said, and my partner couldn't help because he had to go to work. And that really throws the whole idea of what a homeless person looks like out
Yeah.
the window.
Exactly.
And here you had a young couple who are behaving almost in an old-fashioned way. He goes to work, she rears the kids. And the only thing missing was a roof, you know. And she said that they had been in the same house for 7 years, so it's their home, and that the landlord had decided to sell. And they couldn't find anywhere that they could afford. And because of that, she's waking up in different hotels and has to spend the whole day looking for somewhere just for the night, and doesn't have the time to look for somewhere to live. And I immediately thought, well, there's the story. It's like you can follow that woman I was going to do it for 24 hours, and then I thought, I dropped what I was writing, but I put it aside and immediately went upstairs to my office and wrote a plan, what they call in the business a treatment, like a summary. And I decided I'd immediately make it a little bit more than 24 hours because we'd see her getting a hotel room, so we would then know what she was doing for the next day. The same process, on the phone. And I wrote that really, really quickly, a couple of days I had it done. And I had a meeting with a woman called Emma Norton who works for the film company Element. They made Normal People, the big hit last year. And I emailed her and said, I've just written a treatment about a homeless woman. Do you want to read it? And she got back literally immediately and said, yeah. So the ball started rolling there. But it was made for very little money, but actually getting the money to make a film about a homeless woman and her children proved quite difficult, you know. But I think they did a brilliant job making
definitely.
it. Yeah, brilliant acting. And the director, Paddy Brannock, it was such a, well, with all of them, it was brilliant to work with them all. And the actors, the kids, you know, some of them had never acted before. Yeah, and they were so good. Somebody I know in London watched it over the weekend, and he said, I can't believe they're acting, you know. And because of it, you know, sometimes it's a virtue, you know, when she's picking them up from school and there's people coming out of the school, they're people picking up their kids from school. They're not actors pretending to be picking up little actors, you know, so they're the real deal.
Yeah.
And in a way, what I liked about that as well is that your notions about, well, are they all white or what? Are we going to have some, you know, black people in there? And actually, the school, the people who go to send their kids to that school, they made that decision because there's a mix of people coming out the gates. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, in a way, it would always be great to have a bit more money, a bit more elbow room in the budget so you can do more things. But I think in many ways the lack of a budget made it that bit better because everything was tight. You know?
How does the budget get decided?
People who are much better at figures than me go through the thing and said we need that amount for that and that amount and that, and they can do. That's what they're trained to do.
Not just see Roddy Doyle sent an email, give him what he wants to make this film. No, get the Caprio and all in, collecting the kids.
The bulk of film scripts and television stuff I've done has never seen the light of day.
Yeah.
Luckily, every story and every novel I've ever written has been published, but it's not the same with films at all because of the money, and you know, it's hard sometimes. You put a lot of work into something and it never gets made. It's hard not to see it as a failure. You know?
Yeah.
Really, really hard. So, but in this case, anyway, it was on, it was off, it was on, it was off, and then they realised that we've the money to make it, and it was made. And it was a great experience, brilliant. It seems a strange thing to say because it is, you know, it's not a hoot, it's not a funny film.
No, yeah.
But to see, like Sarah Green who plays Rosie, to see an actor like that just take lines that you've written, you know, and they're in the middle of the script, you know, the dialogue runs down the middle of a script, you know. But I never had a sense of what she looked like or anything like that. And then Sarah comes along, and she's from Cork. You know, this is acting, like she's from Cork. But you'd never guess it. And then just to see her become the character is quite an extraordinary experience. And you know, it was Paddy. I wasn't there that day. I don't go on the set much because usually my job is done, so I just go out of curiosity or sometimes to say hello to people. But there's a lovely scene where she's outside the railings with the kids waiting for the older kids to come out of school, and the little young one has the toy that keeps getting lost, Peachy, and she ties the ears around the railing, and that's not in the script.
Just as an actually.
She did that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And it's lovely.
Yeah.
And it says so much. It made her and them somehow even realer.
Yeah.
More
She did
raw.
that.
Like.
Yeah. She behaved like a kid.
Yeah, but I think, like you said, like it is, it's so relatable. And but the thing that people do misunderstand with homelessness and things is when people think of homeless facilities and homelessness, they think of drugs, they think of all this type of thing. Sleeping bags, they think of this. And even in the hostels, they think it's just alcohol and drug related when there is people in there. Like I said before, I met people in homeless facilities who were leaving early in the morning to go to work, to come back to them homeless facilities. And I met people who were like very, very intelligent people who were going out and doing a hard day's graft and going back and sleeping in a hostel that night. And I think there's that misconception. But not even just in homeless facilities, in working class areas and working class that you talk about. There's a misconception about the working class areas that everybody feels entitled and everybody's on the dole and everybody's, you know, there's this misconception.
Your house is free.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know,
You don't pay rent.
there's that way. You got a free gaff, you know. It's fucking.
It would wear you out. And the thing people said to me, you know, and often sometimes as a compliment to the actor and to the whole tone of Rosie, that she's so polite. And then one or two just found that unbelievable, that a woman of that type in that condition would be saying thanks on the phone to a hotel worker who's saying, no, we don't have a room, as if she should shout and bawl. And one of the points is that she's very gracious, she's well reared.
Yeah.
And but I think there's a sense that she is so tired that if you like, that lovely manner she has, it's going to be nibbled away at, inevitably.
Yeah.
She's not going to sleep properly. She's going to be, waking up terrified every morning because she doesn't know where she is.
Stress, anxiety.
The kids are eating takeaways, and, it's a treat now and again, but it's going to affect them. The poor young one, the oldest kid is doing her homework in the car. And you can see why she's trying to break away to get into a house of a friend of hers. A bit of normality. The jammies on watching, there's a Gilmore Girls they're watching. So, you can see how it's nibbling away. But what I've tried to do consistently with my work is to, in a way, if you take the characters from the commitments or whatever, to really be true to where they come from, not apologise for it in any way, not try to make them into something that they're not. But at the same time, my deep, if I have a conviction that I've had all my life and that I hope to carry right to the very end, is that everybody's intelligent and everybody has the same value, and nobody, because they come from a certain address, is worth more than anybody else. And I think one of the lessons of the pandemic was, the difference between private and public health, that disappeared for a while because it had to. And the leave insert disappeared for a while. So the grind schools that people pay for, in the idea that they own the leave insert, that it is the property of private schools on the south side of the river and one or two other places, and then whatever's left can go to the rest. That got nibbled away. And so these things that we thought were kind of cut into stone and were, unchangeable, aren't. So the opportunity, in a way, it's a bit like the same with the way Dublin is being planned. That the opportunity is there for a shift, for a change. And homelessness, of all the problems in this country, is the one that makes me most ashamed, I think. Because it's one of the richest countries in the world. We're not comfortable with that. But it is actually a very wealthy country. And if the money was distributed differently and fairer, when there wasn't a bean, and economists could probably come in and explain it, why I'm being naive. But when the country was on its knees in the 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s, they built the most houses.
Yeah.
It's an ideological thing. They decided, no, we can't do this. We leave it for the market.
Even the likes of Kilbarrack as well falls into that.
The whole ring of houses around, where hundreds of thousands of people live in Dublin. These houses that have stood the test, Crumlin, houses that were built, almost a century ago, and nobody's suggesting knocking them down. So it's just unfair.
I agree.
Yeah. Just before we wrap up, the last thing I want to talk about is, now this could again be me being naive, but has your stuff ever been covered on the curriculum in Ireland?
Bits of it, yeah. In primary schools, there are stories in primary school. I had a story called New Boy about a little African lad who goes into school, outside of school term time, so he's plonked into the school. And a guy tries to bully him and it all works out, and that ended up on the curriculum.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think there was talk of the Snapper at one point being on, one of the optional books on the Leave Insert, and I think Paddy Clark as well. I'm not sure what the state of play is or whether it's... I know that Paddy Clark was on courses in the UK.
Yeah.
And I know that the books are in colleges and things like that.
I just think that, having one of our own on the curriculum with relatable stories, and then how it's changed how writing was at the time, the dialogue and how it's structured and stuff like that. To be honest with you,
it's not in any way a dream or an aspiration or anything I'd want, really. I think in many ways I'm happier outside the school gates.
Yeah.
But if I heard, I know that there's a certain leeway now, and teachers are allowed to choose the books they want to use. And I've written books for children and they're used, and that's lovely. Yeah. That's lovely. I really, really like that. But so I suppose my attitude towards it is a bit contradictory, because I could say something for you. I like being outside the school gates, but if I go home and there's an email telling me that we're putting on one of my children's books into the schools, I'm saying brilliant.
Yeah. No, I think there's substance there, because being on the other side of that, someone who set the Leave Insert, and you have to analyse not just the story, but what the writer was trying to get across, and you're like.
Well, the problem there is the Leave Insert.
Yeah.
Measuring human intelligence on the basis of a few hours in June at the very end of your education. And it means that the 12 years that took you to get to the Leave Insert are irrelevant. And all you have to do is learn stuff off by heart and be relatively good at writing very quickly. I know it's more complicated than that, but not that much more complicated. And it's no way to measure. I think there's a lot to be said for being able to learn and to be able to write at speed and to learn things off by heart. They are skills, but the idea that it's the be all and the end all,
Yeah.
and that the way to. My worry would be if one of my books was on the Leaving Cert, that it would be simplified to say 3 things about this character, discuss,
Yeah.
that type of nonsense. So, but we've got on now for 2 years with the Leaving. The Leaving Cert wasn't there at all for 1 year, and then it's this hybrid version.
Yeah.
And probably the hybrid version is something, but I think the Leaving Cert really, more than anything else, just strangles education.
Definitely. I'll just give you an example from my Leaving Cert. So I done my Leaving Cert in 2012. The book that we covered for English was The Kite Runner. Are you aware of this one? It's about Soviet-occupied Afghanistan.
Yeah.
One fella sees his mate getting raped by another fella, and it's just about his life. Then they meet as adults, and you have to talk about that. You have to talk about what the writer was thinking, and I'm just thinking I don't even know the history behind the Soviets occupying Afghanistan.
I don't have a problem with that because
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. If you combined history and the book itself, and
Well,
I
don't think the curriculum does though. That was my issue with it.
They're all simplified down at the end. You
Yeah.
have to write. You've got 45 minutes to write a question,
Yeah.
and if you don't do a well enough job, you're not going to college, or you're going to fail.
Yeah. Whereas
And
if
also, my problem with the Leaving Cert is that it assumes that it's like greyhound racing, that basically everybody in the traps has to go to college, and it ignores all the other ways of going through your life.
yeah.
It's all down to points, isn't it? That stupid way of measuring
point
human
system, yeah.
intelligence.
But I just thought it'd be more relevant if you're take the man for example. Jimmy Rabbit has been laid off for his job. He goes down to the pub with X amount of money, knowing that he'll only get a certain amount of rounds in.
Question.
No, well, he knows. No, the sense
How many
of
points
pride.
can you buy?
The sense of pride is there. Where he knows if he has £7, he'll go down to the pub. He'll only have X amount of rounds before they close, and he can go home, and his mates won't think that he has no money.
Yeah.
There's a sense of relevance there, and you're like, I know where you're getting at.
Yeah,
His pride is there. You know
I
what I
see
mean?
what you mean, but I do think you could be too parochial that that the only books that you can read are books set in Dublin.
Well, no,
in
I
the
think
present day.
I think that would apply to a lot of Irish way of
Yeah.
thinking. The pride is there, but I
Yeah.
just think we need more
Well,
variety.
personally, but I think the key is variety. Because I think if you decide, well, we won't have any of the foreign stuff. I mean, I read The Kite Runner. I thought it was really, really great. And I do read a lot of foreign work and work that's translated
Yeah.
into English. I'm reading a lot of Japanese books for some reason at the moment, and I really love them
Yeah.
because they're well translated into English. And I'd hate to think that we'd simplify the education system so that only contemporary living writers from Ireland would be on
Yeah.
the curriculum.
Yeah.
We tried that when the state was founded by keeping out all foreign music and foreign influences and foreign games, depriving ourselves of an awful lot, really.
Maybe I just have.
It didn't work anyway.
I probably
do
just have
understand
repressed
what you're
memories of
saying
it. Do you know what I mean? When I
Yeah,
see
you
the
just
guy
had a
running,
lousy
fuck
time
that.
in
Yeah. I definitely did. Yeah.
How have we gone this far without mentioning the Roy Keane thing?
How have we actually gone this far? Did you live with Roy Keane?
Beg your pardon?
Did you have to live with Roy Keane?
No.
Did
no.
you stay
Are you
with
talking
him?
about the practicalities of how we did it?
Yeah.
Quite
Sorry-
simple.
Sorry, Roddy. We should explain this. You ghost wrote.
No, I prefer to say co-wrote.
Why is it down as a ghost writer? As you, sorry, that
I
you
don't think I'm
ghost wrote
described as the
his,
ghostwriter on the book.
His
In-
biography, second biography.
The second half it's called. So it's about his life in the last few years before he finished football, and then his life to that date, 2014, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in management and then punditry and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. So the practicality of it was, because Roy lives in Manchester and I live here in Dublin, obviously, is that once a week I'd get the first flight out to Manchester, and Roy would book a small hotel room, and a neutral space, we decided, so we wouldn't have the distractions of home life and things like that. We get straight down to work, 4 hours, At first, I'd ask him questions and we build on those questions, and then I would write out something and send it to him beforehand. And the next time we'd meet, we'd go through what I'd read, and I'd point out stuff I think needed more attention, and he'd read over what I'd done and said, I don't think I want to say that. I want to say it differently.
Yeah.
So when ghostwriting in my imagination is that somebody gets bare facts of somebody and then writes out the story. Whereas with us, it was very much a partnership. So the second week, he came to Dublin. He'd get a flight to Dublin. By then he was also Martin O'Neill's assistant, you know, in
Yeah.
the Ireland job. So sometimes he'd be over in Dublin anyway, and we grabbed the opportunity. And there's a hotel right beside the airport, and I'd book a little conference room there. I think it was about 30 quid. And we'd stay there for the 4 hours and move on, and then either he'd go home or whatever. And so we did that back and forth for about, I think it was about 6 months. And it worked out brilliantly, really, really brilliantly. It was such a, I can't imagine it being any better. He was just a great guy to work with, you know. So if somebody, I don't like quibbling too much, but somebody says you ghost wrote, to me, it's not false modesty, it's unfair, because to me it was an experience that we both went through.
Yeah.
And that it wasn't him handing over the raw materials of his life and telling me to get on with it. That it was very much back and forth. And I learned so much from him, because as a football lover,
Yeah.
learned so much about the reality of, you know, the way journalists, you hear them on the radio all the time talking about he lost a dressing room.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering sometimes, how does he know? Your man's never been in a dressing room
Yeah.
since he was 7,
Yeah.
you know. So actually to learn so much about it and things about the reality of the working day. And then when Roy started talking about the physical pain that made him end his career up at Celtic, and he described it in only a way that he could. I remember him talking about my hip was screaming at me.
Yeah.
Barking at him.
Brilliant, you know, and that's not ghostwriting. That's he said that.
Yeah.
I put that down on the page, and he made more of that, and he described, brilliant to witness it happening, but then brilliant to put it on paper and realize it works. It's really good. So it was very much a partnership, but the practicality of it was, I went there, he came here. I went there, he came.
And how did you get the call for that? Because you would have been more fictional.
Yeah, I got a very short email from somebody I didn't know from a company. Would you be interested in writing a book with Roy Keane?
How does
was
that
it.
come about? Like, that's just Roy's decision.
I have a feeling that when the idea was put to Roy, I was one of the names that was suggested, and he said, "Yeah, I'd be
Because
interested."
Dunphy done the first one, didn't he?
Yeah.
He did, yeah.
And he obviously got the sack then because he was dirt.
Well,
No comment,
I'm
look.
not saying anything. I'm not saying anything.
Variety, isn't it? It's variety change
Yeah,
her up.
different conditions, different, you know.
I think it's just a strange one because you would have been more fictional.
They made
And
a sub at half time.
Well,
that's why it's called the second
That's
half.
what made it. When I got the timing was good as well, because I just finished one piece of work and I hadn't thought up another one.
Right.
So ping, this email arrives, and the timing was good and it was intriguing because I'd never done anything like that before.
Yeah,
So it was an adventure.
yeah.
I only ever, and this goes right back to the very beginning, I've only ever done things that I really want to do. Because if the energy isn't there, it's not going to happen. It's going
Yeah,
to be
that is
dreadful.
what I
So
find.
I really thought, well, this is really a step into the unknown. And we met before we decided to do it. And I think by the time we'd finished, we'd kind of convinced each other that this is something we could have a go at. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Because I thought what I really wanted to do was to capture the way he spoke and communicated on paper so that you wouldn't get a sense that this was me
Yeah.
writing on behalf of him, that it was him. And that's, to me, that was the challenge. That's what I wanted to do. And it worked out. It was, I don't know, that's 7 years ago, and I still feel just a mere mention of the book or the name, I just feel this glow. It was
Joy.
brilliant. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah.
Right.
Joy, you got the word there, yeah.
Yeah. Last question I have, right? I'm probably going to sting you here. Greatest player to ever pull on an Irish jersey?
The answer, I should say Roy, but I would say Paul McGrath.
I think you said this to me before as well. I said Roy Keane, and I think you said no. You said Paul McGrath, did you not?
No, I would say Roy Keane. I'd say Roy Keane as a player, though. Like, as a United player, not for what he did. Do you get
No,
me?
as
Overall, you're talking.
yeah,
as-
yeah.
I mean, it's irrelevant. I mean, to me, you asked, the question you asked was the greatest player.
Yeah.
You didn't say whether you
Who had
agree
the
or
best
disagree.
Ireland career now? I said
Yeah.
the greatest player, yeah.
Yeah.
The greatest
Yeah.
player. It'd be hard to go against Roy.
Two incredible
Yeah.
players, and I mean, it's part of the fun of this type of conversation. But you know, to my mind, I can visualize them both. You know, amazing, and being in the old Lansdowne and watching them, and I think there were times when Paul McGrath was like 4 people at the back, and then when he played in midfield, he always seemed to be. He was a solid wall between the opposition and the goal, and then he scored the odd goal. He was just It was a joy to watch him, you know, and his sense of where he should be. And then it was Roy back and forth, you know, amazing, breaking up things. But they were both quite extraordinary, I mean.
I genuinely think if Roy Keane was English, now I know he's played for Ireland and he would have had to have a career for England, but if he was English, the media would put him up there with Gascoigne.
Of course they would.
Oh, yeah.
I think they literally, it's a discredit. They don't give him as much credit as he deserves.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But I think about that, ask me the best Ireland player in an Ireland jersey
That's
only.
different.
They had to go
question,
against like the likes of Robbie Keane and that, you know what I mean? Just the goals.
Yeah, that's
I
different.
mean, it seems, you know, one where you're having a harmless game, but you'd hate to think there's somebody listening feeling a little bit hurt because they're not included.
Yeah.
And you said Robbie Keane. And there was a lot of sneering at Robbie Keane when he was actually pinging the goals in, you know, because he doesn't score against the good teams. Well, actually, very few people score against the good teams. That's why they're good. You know, but he scored you know, we'd love him now, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
You know, he was brilliant. You know, there's some really going right back. John Giles. I mean, I feel now guilty not mentioning John Giles. He was, you know, incredible. Absolutely incredible.
Long before our time.
Ah, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Look, listen, yeah, that's a wrap, isn't it?
Can I go home now?
Yeah.
We let you go, Roddy.
Roddy, thanks for coming in. We really
Pleasure.
do
It was a
appreciate
pleasure.
it.
I enjoyed
Thanks very
it.
much.
I
Really
really
do.
enjoyed it.
I think when people look at our podcast and what it is, I think
You explained it very good to me earlier. You said, how can us two lads from a working class area from the inner city in Dublin have a podcast and not have Roddy Doyle on it with the opportunity to have Roddy Doyle? So,
that's what.
so
That's lovely.
it worked all
So
right.
throw us that
That's
few quid when you have
lovely.
it there already. That nice little plug. Right, we'll wrap her up.
Yeah.
Right,
please.
take us out, Johnny.
Boom!
I'm starving.
Subscribe to this podcast for free on the Go Loud app.
What you waiting for? Put your back in it. Just a little more. Throw your weight in it now. Tell your body you're ten. Walk it hard and long. When you finish that
The hip knocker.
song, go down.